Okay, so today we are diving into this, well, let's be honest, pretty provocative
Yeah,
document.
provocative is one word for it.
It's called the Social Box. Have you heard of this?
I have. It's by this,
It's by Andreu Ginestet.
yeah, Ginestet Social. That's right. And he's, what is he, like an artist, an academic? I know he's working with, like, complexity theory and systems of violence, which,
Yeah, and he kind of frames this social box as a way to think about that, about systems of violence
it's a
and,
complexity governance tool, or at least
yeah,
that's how he describes it.
right, which is a mouthful.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. It's a bit jargony, but I think what's interesting, or at least what struck me as I was reading this, is that he even acknowledges up front, like right off the bat, that this might be a little controversial,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
might rub some people the wrong way.
Right. It's like he's anticipating pushback.
Exactly. And honestly, that just made me want to dig in even more, because whenever someone's like, hey, this might be a little out there, I'm like, okay, tell me more.
Yeah, exactly. So the basic idea, at least as I understand it, is that he's trying to illustrate how this small group, the elite, the 1%, manipulate society to, basically maintain their wealth and power, while the rest of us, the 99%, are kind of just stuck going along with it.
Yeah. And he really hammers home that idea that we, the 99%, kind of just accept this like it's a given.
Yeah.
But it's this social box metaphor that he uses that I found so fascinating. Have you ever actually pictured society as a literal box? Because that's what he wants us to do.
Right. It's like a very visual metaphor.
Yeah. So imagine most of us, we're inside this box. We're working our jobs, paying our bills, just kind of living our lives.
Just trying to get by.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's this tiny group, the elite, and they're living above the box. Like they're literally physically on top of it.
And presumably, they're having a much better time up there.
Right. They've got the best view, the best of everything. But here's the thing. They're not just up there enjoying the view, right? They're also controlling what happens inside the box.
They're manipulating the system.
Exactly. Changing the rules, rigging the game, whatever you want to call it. And he uses this really interesting example to illustrate this post-World War II Germany.
Which I thought was a really fascinating choice. It's not usually the first historical period that comes to mind when you're talking about, these kinds of power dynamics.
Exactly. And he focuses on this really specific period from 1945 to 2020 to kind of show how this social box plays out over time.
Right. And it's interesting because we often hear about, post-war Germany as this story of rebuilding and renewal. They go from total devastation to becoming this economic powerhouse.
Right, the economic miracle.
Exactly. But Genestet's point is that the more things changed, the more they stayed the same, at least in terms of who was really in control. He claims that even though, Nazism was officially defeated, that same elite power structure, it never really went away.
Yeah, they just kind of adapted, found new ways to exert their influence.
Right. And that leads us to this idea of the crushing of the box, which I have to admit I found a little ominous.
Yeah, it doesn't sound good, does it?
Mm.
Basically, Ginestet is arguing that, as Germany's economy starts to boom after the war, right, there's more wealth being generated overall.
The pie is getting bigger, so to speak.
Exactly. So the box itself, meaning the overall prosperity of the 99%, starts to expand. And here's where it gets interesting. Ginestet argues that this expansion actually poses a threat to the elites.
Oh, really? How so?
Because it disrupts the power imbalance they rely on.
I see. So they feel like they need to regain control.
Exactly. And Ginestet argues that starting around the 1990s, we see a shift. He claims that the elites started to implement strategies to claw back some of that wealth and reassert their dominance.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty bold claim. So what evidence does he have to back that up? What kind of strategies are we talking about?
Well, he points to some very specific historical events, like, for example, the 2008 financial crisis.
Wait, really? You're saying that while, so many people were struggling, losing their jobs, their homes during that time, that the elite were actually benefiting?
That's exactly what Ginestet is arguing. He claims that these crises, as devastating as they are for most people, actually create opportunities for those at the very top to increase their own wealth and power.
So it's like these economic crises, they almost become a way to, hit the reset button.
Right. Like a correction.
Yeah, exactly. A way for the elite to reassert control, kind of put everyone back in their place, keep them in that social box.
And he even takes this a step further. He links this idea to the 2015 refugee crisis.
Okay, wow. I'm curious to hear how he makes that connection. How does that fit into this whole social box theory?
Well, his argument is that, obviously the influx of refugees, it's a humanitarian crisis, right? But he's saying that it also created, let's say, certain opportunities for those in power.
Opportunities to, what, exploit the situation?
Yeah, to maybe, exploit cheap labor or to push through certain policies or even just to distract the public from other issues.
It's like he's saying that, in a way, these crises, they can be used to, like, further certain agendas.
Exactly. And again, it's about looking beyond the surface, right?
Yeah.
Questioning the narratives that we're often given about how these events unfold. Because, like, on the surface, it's a refugee crisis. But he's asking us to look deeper and see who might be benefiting from that crisis on another level.
It's like he's giving us a new lens through which to view current events,
Yeah.
A way to maybe connect some dots that we might not have otherwise connected.
And it's not just historical events either. He even brings in the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering about that. How does he tie that into this whole social box model?
Well, remember how we were talking about, crises being used to concentrate wealth and power? He argues that the pandemic was, in a way, no different.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Right. Think about it. Certain individuals, certain industries, they actually profited from the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
While countless others were struggling, losing their businesses, their livelihoods.
Yeah, it's like all those headlines we saw, billionaires get richer during pandemic, while, small businesses are shutting down left and right. It's easy to just kind of dismiss those as like isolated incidents or whatever, but when you look at it through the lens of the social box, it's like, oh, okay, maybe there's a pattern here.
Right. It's a pattern. It's not to say that it's some kind of grand conspiracy, but it's about understanding how these systems operate, how they tend to benefit those who are already at the top.
Right. It's about power dynamics, ultimately. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, Ginestet's model, the evidence he presents, but I think the big question for a lot of people listening is going to be like, so what? What are the implications of all of this?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something I hope everyone listening will kind of sit with even after, this deep dive is over.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I think what Ginestet is ultimately offering is, in a way, a tool for change.
A tool for change. How so?
Well, you know how he calls the social box a complexity governance tool.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he's getting at is that it's not just about understanding the problem. It's about finding solutions. Like, once you see these power dynamics at play, once you're aware of them, then you can start to challenge them.
Okay, so where do we even begin? If this social box is as pervasive as Ginestet claims it is, like, what can any one person or even a group of people do to actually make a difference?
It's a big challenge, no doubt. But, Ginestet does offer some hints, some potential avenues for change.
Like, what does he suggest we do?
Well, remember how we used post-war Germany as his case study? He actually proposes a pretty radical solution, something he believes could disrupt these power structures that have been in place for so long.
Okay, you've got to tell me, what is it?
He believes that a major step towards a more equitable system would involve nationalizing currencies.
Whoa, okay. Nationalizing currencies. So, like, getting rid of the euro, the dollar, all of that.
Well, not necessarily getting rid of, but definitely moving away from their dominance. He's talking about a fundamental shift in the global financial system.
Okay, so he's thinking big picture here.
Absolutely. Because his argument is that as long as we have these centralized, privately controlled currencies, the potential for manipulation by a powerful few, it's always going to be there. He's calling for a system that's more decentralized, more transparent, more accountable to the people,
I mean, that's a pretty radical idea when you really think about it.
It is radical, yeah. But, sometimes radical ideas are what we need to spark real change. And whether or not you agree with his proposed solution, you have to admire his willingness to think big, to challenge the status quo. And I think that's a good segue into, the broader implications of the social box, because even if we don't have all the answers, even if we're not sure what the right solutions are, Ginestet is at least urging us to start asking the right questions.
And to maybe start questioning some assumptions that we've been making about how the world works. It's easy to feel, I don't know, kind of powerless when you start thinking about these huge issues, right? Like, what can I actually do to change, like, the global financial system? It seems impossible.
I totally get it. It can feel really overwhelming, for sure. But I think, going back to what Ginestet's saying, it's not about, like, everyone suddenly becoming revolutionaries or anything like that.
Right. He's not saying we all need to, like, quit our jobs and join the revolution tomorrow.
Exactly. It's more about like just shifting your perspective a little. Like once you start to understand these systems, these forces at play, then you can start making more informed choices in your own life, right?
So it's less about these grand gestures and more about like changing the way we think and act day to day.
Exactly, yeah. And honestly, I think that's probably a more realistic approach anyway, don't you?
Yeah, probably.
It's about being more aware, you know, about the systems we're part of, the choices that we make, and how those choices, even the small ones, they all add up, you know?
Yeah, like that whole think globally, act locally idea.
Right. Because we can start by looking at like our own relationship to power,
Hmm.
you know, in our own lives, in our communities. Like, how are we using our own influence, however big or small it might be? Are we supporting businesses, organizations that share our values, things like that? It all adds up.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom of it all, when you focus on how big these problems are. But it's true, we have more power than we think, especially when we work together.
Exactly. Collective action. That's where it's at. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate about Ginestet's work, honestly. Like, he's not afraid to ask the tough questions, and he's not pretending to have all the answers. Because, let's be real, nobody does.
No, it's true.
No.
But at least he's getting people to talk about these issues, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes this whole social box model so interesting, I think. It's not just some, like, academic theory. It's like a call to action, you know?
It's an invitation to join this conversation,
Yeah.
right? And to realize that, as overwhelming as it can feel, we're not alone in this, and we can actually make a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think we've probably given our listeners a lot to think about today. We've unpacked this idea of the social box, looked at how it plays out in the real world, and hopefully, sparked some interesting conversations along the way.
And remember, this is just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Now it's up to you to take these ideas, explore them further, see what resonates with you.
Exactly. Maybe we can all start to, I don't know, think outside the box a little bit, literally. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.